London, summer of 1483. The air is thick with grief, rumors, and ambition. A kingdom is mourning. King Edward IV is dead, but the mourning doesn't last long, because his heir, 12-year-old Edward V, is already being escorted to the Tower of London. Officially, it's where the new kings prepare for their coronation. Unofficially, it's where the crown makes problems disappear. His younger brother Richard joins him a few weeks later. Two boys, blood of the Plantagenets, locked behind thick stone walls with armed guards at every gate. They were last seen playing in the garden, and then they were never seen again. What happened inside the Tower of London? Who silenced the heirs to England's crown, and why? Was it cold ambition, a political cover-up, or something even stranger? This isn't just a medieval mystery. This is one of the oldest unsolved disappearances in royal history. One that still sparks debate, conspiracy theories, and even DNA analysis more than 500 years later. And now, there's even a woman who calls this mystery solved. Today, we're walking straight into the shadows of the Tower of London, asking, did Richard III murder his nephews? And if so, why has no one been willing to uncover the truth? I'm Mandolin. Welcome to Wild Curiosity. Hello, friends. How's it going? I hope everyone is enjoying this start to your summer. I am getting pretty stoked for some upcoming adventures and headed out for a little backpacking adventure this weekend to Shy Beach with my friends and their families. Sadly, Jeffrey can't make it, but that's okay because next week we're going to be leaving for Northern California to Lassen Volcanic Monument. So get to cross off a national park and check out some volcanoes. It's going to be super sick. We're camping, like I said, with friends, going to be hiking every day and checking out some cool trails. So shout out to my mother-in-law, Danielle, for watching Little Hanky Boy for us. And also, I wanted to do a quick shout out to one of my little brothers, my middle little brother, who isn't so little anymore. He's actually 27 today on June 12th. My Gemini brother from the same mother, Sam. And yeah, happy birthday, Sammy. We were just texting, talking about having him on the podcast. So I would love to have him here. He listens to a lot of the same podcasts that I do, and we kind of just get each other's vibe, I think. So yeah, happy birthday, Sam. I just also had my birthday on the 7th. That was really good. I have the best friends. They made me a really cool balloon arch, and we had a really nice barbecue here. Went out for some drinks after, and I just had a really good time with really good people. So I'm very grateful for everyone in my life. Other things that are in my lineup are some Idaho is going to be sprinkled in there. I hope to get out to Sun Valley and probably like the Sandpoint area. Another thing that came up that is kind of wild is I'm starting my geology program at Central Washington this fall, but before fall quarter starts, like August 28th through September 12th, I'm going to be back in California, but Southern California in the Mojave Desert at this research center. But yeah, I'm just trying to go with the flow, getting kind of anxious about moving and school starting. I'm taking like 5 classes the first quarter because I'm really trying to get this degree done. Anyways, let's get into this sad fairy tale, like a Grimm Brothers version, I would say. I went on a little bit of a journey down the rabbit hole, as I tend to do, especially on TikTok, about medieval times. And some of the craziest shit went down back then. But apparently this story is one of the biggest cold cases in the history of England. And it's crazy because I've never heard of it. I have been known to read some epic fantasy romances. And I think that's kind of what got me a little bit interested in this time period or whatever. Like, how real is some of that stuff? I'm just really interested in it. The whole bloodline thing, the time period. So this is kind of like, I would say, Rapunzel, but it's boys and they may not ever get rescued. So let's jump in. Okay, so who were these princes? Let's set the scene. The year is 1483. England is still recovering from decades of civil war. The War of the Roses is what the war is called, is a brutal power struggle between two sides of the same royal family. There's the House of Lancaster, who was the Red Rose, and then there's the House of York, which is the White Rose. The Yorks are in power now. The King, Edward IV, is a successful and charismatic Yorkist who claimed the throne during civil war by defeating the previous king in battle. But his reign wasn't exactly stable. He married Elizabeth Woodville, who actually was the first queen ever brought from the commoner side into royalty. So she was a commoner and a widow, and they did this in secret, causing a massive outrage among the nobles. So I like to believe that he really loved her. I didn't really go into the research on them as a couple, but that's what I like to believe. Anyways, he made some powerful enemies, including his own former allies, by getting married to this lady. So his legitimacy had always been questioned due to rumors also about his parentage. A fun fact, really quick, Edward IV and Jeff have the same birthday. So yeah, just a Taurus king out there. When he dies suddenly in April of 1483, his eldest son, Edward V, is only just 12 years old. And his younger son, Richard, Duke of York, is 9. Edward V is declared king almost immediately, but he's still just a child. So his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, is appointed as Lord Protector. Basically, that means that he's supposed to rule temporarily and take over for Edward until Edward's old enough to wear the crown. So then Edward is brought to the Tower of London, which is a common tradition for kings in waiting to prepare for their coronation. And this tower is not just a single tower, but a massive fortress complex like a castle with over 20 towers. And this includes the infamous White Tower. Soon after that, his little brother Richard joins him there. And they, as far as they know, are awaiting his coronation to become king. Let's talk a little bit about Richard III and his rise to power. As we've discussed, this was the boys' uncle. So, good old Uncle Dick has the boys moved to the Tower of London. And he says it's for their safety, which, like I said before, it's actually customary for kings in waiting to go to the tower awaiting their coronation. But what happens next is not customary at all. Richard begins an investigation and circulating a claim that the boys' father, Edward IV, was previously betrothed to another woman contractually before marrying their mother. If this is true, this would make the boys illegitimate, no longer valid heirs to the throne. So sadly, Parliament supports him and they pass a law called the Titulus Regius. I hope that's how it's said, which legally declares that the princes are bastards. And just weeks before young Edward's planned coronation, his uncle Dick seizes the throne and crowns himself King Richard III in July 1483. And at this exact same time, the boys disappear from public view. So by late summer of 1483, neither boy is ever seen again. The rumors fly they were smothered in their sleep, drowned in wine, or walled up alive. But no official statement is ever made, or really official investigation either. In 1674, so almost 200 years later, during renovations of the Tower of London, 2 small skeletons are discovered in a wooden chest beneath a staircase in the White Tower. And the White Tower is where the boys were. So Charles II orders the bones reinterred in Westminster Abbey, and a plaque declares them to be the lost princes, which it's just a label, no investigation, like I said, no forensic analysis, and no DNA testing, obviously, because it's the 1600s. Modern scientists say that they totally can test the bones using mitochondrial DNA from living relatives of the princes. But Westminster Abbey and the royal family have repeatedly refused testing the bones, citing the need to avoid disturbing royal remains and respect the dead. which to me, I totally get because obviously you shouldn't mess with anybody's remains. But I almost feel like, how do they even know they're royal just because they were in the tower? Like, they haven't been tested, so we don't even know who they are. Maybe it's just because they're at Westminster Abbey. I'm not sure. And yet, Richard III's bones were actually dug up in a car park in 2012 and tested within months. And that's how they knew it was him. As of 2024, new findings by a researcher named Philippa Langley, who actually is the same historian who found Richard III's grave, suggested that the princes may actually have survived. She claims to have uncovered documentary evidence that places them living in other parts of England and later Ireland under false names and with guardians paid by the crown. So 2012, Philippa, who was a marketing executive turned historical sleuth, leads the dig at a car park in Leicester. And she says she was guided by emotional intuition, and she somehow uncovers King Richard III's skeleton underneath some thick soil. They verify his identity using mitochondrial DNA tracing and skeletal analysis, and this is a world-changing moment. But Langley's story doesn't end there. So after that, she was really inspired by her success, and she launches in 2015 the Missing Princes Project, which is a full-scale cold case investigation using police-style methods, eyewitness timelines, forensic research, and archival mining, all aimed at uncovering new clues to what happened to the boys in 1483. So this is what she found. In 1487, she found payment records from Margaret of York. So that would be Edward IV's sister, the Duchess of Burgundy, so the boys' aunt, referencing her nephew, son of King Edward, expelled from his dominion. So this is a description that totally matches Edward V, who at this time would have been about 17. She also found a receipt dated the 16th of December, 1487, detailing weapons purchased for Edward V. And this was long after Richard III's death, too. She then found some log and pension records placing two noble boys under care in rural English towns. Names weren't recorded, but ages and context still fits the princes. And then there is lastly, an Irish coronation event in Dublin on the 24th of May in 1487, where a boy was crowned King Edward at Christ Church Cathedral, and within months, that same teenage prince fighting in Ireland. So this is Langley's case. She thinks that the two royal boys did not die, that they were hidden, and then they were relocated and possibly set up with undercover identities to avoid Tudor interference. So that was such an interesting find. There are obviously critics with Philippa Langley's case, and they say that the receipts could relate to symbolic gifts or a Yorkist conspiracy and not actual royal survival. But her supporters point to the consistent repetition of princely age, timing, and high-level patronage as more than coincidence. But still, there's no DNA test of the known remains and no public archival dating of these receipts. The Westminster Abbey permission remains denied. Whose bones are in the tower? Like, who is that? They were two children, and more modern day investigators did check out the bones and say that they were relevant to the age, but they've never been tested for what sex they were or any of that's like really the whole key to this thing is in those bones, I believe. Okay, so let's talk about the suspects and who had the motive for these boys' disappearance. So we obviously are going to start with the notorious Uncle Richard III. His motive is obviously clear: eliminate his rivals, take the throne. And he had total control over the tower, and he takes the crown and reigns from July 1483 until his death at Bosworth Field in 1485. So didn't have that long of a reign, and his death signals the end of the Plantagenet dynasty, which would now be passed on to the Tudor family. So the second person who is a suspect in this disappearance is Henry VII, who was a tutor. He defeats Richard III in 1485, marries the prince's sister, Elizabeth of York, to unite the warring houses. His motive, obviously, if the boys were still alive, they were threats to his claim. So he could have unalived them to make sure that he got his successful claim to the throne. And at this point, I mean, they're family by marriage, but he doesn't have any loyalty to these boys. So he could have had them quietly executed after taking power. The Tudors were a new royal house founded by Henry Tudor, a mix of Welsh and English bloodlines. The third person that could have been a suspect in the disappearance was the Duke of Buckingham, who was once Richard's ally and later turned against him. He may have had his own ambitions and access to the tower as well. So, yeah, those are like our three suspects. But, you know, there's so many theories. Like they either just died naturally within the tower, or a lot of people, there's actually some paintings that I will post of them being smothered by pillows. They could have basically been put into a medieval witness protection program, like Philippa Langley believes. And yeah, her new research does support the idea that they lived under false identities. So who knows? Okay, so continuing on, in the 1490s, a man named Perkin Warbeck, interesting name, claims to be Richard, Duke of York. So the little brother, he was 9 at the time he was put in the tower, and says that he's the younger prince. He gains backing from foreign monarchs and even Edward IV's sister, Margaret of Burgundy, their aunt, and he is eventually captured and executed by Henry VII because obviously Henry's like, no, I'm king now, the Tudors rule, so you're dead. The Tudors have every reason to suppress the truth and rewrite this whole narrative. Even in Shakespeare's play, Richard III, he depicts him as a villainous hunchback, a monstrous murderer. But that portrayal wasn't fact. It could have just been propaganda. So kind of interesting. So why does all of this still matter? The urn containing the bones still sits in Westminster Abbey, and leading scientists, including Dr. Turi King, who was the one that officially identified Richard III's bones when Philippa found them, says that it would take less than a month to confirm or deny their identity with DNA. But the church and the monarchy continue to deny permission, raising more questions than answers. Well, friends, that is the story. So I don't know much, but I do know that 2 princes went into this tower, and only one uncle came out with a crown. What followed was silence, and it has lasted centuries. No funeral, no justice, just rumors, propaganda, and bones in a box no one wants to test. So now, 500 years later, scraps of the truth are clawing their way back from the archives. Maybe the princes didn't die in that tower. Maybe the story we've been told, or a villainy, betrayal, and a cold-blooded uncle isn't the story at all. And maybe they were erased, buried under layers of power and politics, just like their names. Anyways, thanks for listening to Wild Curiosity. Stay curious, explore the wild, and don't be afraid to search where others have stopped, because even the oldest stories still have chapters missing. And hopefully, we're going to get an epilogue on this one or something. See you in 2 weeks. Bye. Love you.